Welcome to Cast Friendship, where we talk to awesome creators about their incredible creations. Today, my guest is award-winning writer, designer Banana Chan. Their work includes games such as Jiangshi, Lair, Betrayal, third edition, and now the upcoming solo horror art game about an artist contract to forge a cursed painting, Forgery. Forgery is currently on Indiegogo and well on its way to being funded. Banana Chan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I have a bunch of questions, but um, for those in the audience who might not be very familiar with your work, because I know you've written for Kids on Bikes and a bunch of stuff, and and it's weird because I've been playing these things, and then I'm like, wait, I know that name. I've seen it somewhere else. Um, but for those who don't know, could you tell me? Could you describe your work and what your particular niche is? Because I think you've made a little
Yes,
space for yourself there.
yes, absolutely. So I can start by saying that when I started in the games industry, um, I didn't really have a plan. I just went into it because it seemed fun, it seemed interesting. I got in through LARPing, and the type of games I played, the type of LARPs I played were mostly American freeform games. And so that style is very much like um, it's more about the emotions and the relationships that are built between characters. They're usually very tense. They can be very dark, and they're usually played within like I want to say like it can be anywhere between 1 hour to 5 hours, like something short like that. When you think of a LARP, usually it's like a longer campaign. But for the types of LARPs that I really enjoy, they're usually shorter, and costuming isn't like required. You can just go, dressed as whatever you have on. And the reason for that is because they're built around a convention setting. And so when you go to conventions, you don't have a lot of time. You're probably not prepared with a costume. You're just like going in, right? And so it's designed around that. It's also designed around like making sure uh, that we are playing with like weirder themes, like stranger themes, and they usually tackle like subject matter that is closer to I want to say like real life versus like fantasy. So like the genres for that can range from like drama to romance to whatever else. Um, Horror was a big one. And so that's where I got started and I fell in love with it. And ever since then, I've just been like very much into this idea of like, okay, like TTRPGs, RPGs in general, LARPs, they're not necessarily like I approach it in a way that's not necessarily like a genre itself. It's more of like a vehicle for storytelling. So it's a medium versus a genre. And the genres that I tend to go towards are themes of horror, dark comedies, things like that. So that's sort of like how I got into it and my take on TTRPGs, RPGs in general.
I definitely love that idea of discovering your genre because I often hear people say, "Oh, I don't like reading," and I'm like, that can't be technically true because why wouldn't you like stories? I just think it's that you haven't found the genre that speaks to you, and it's
Right.
same feels the same for TTRPGs. You said you got into this with a LARP. Was there a particular LARP that what was it about? I'm curious.
Oh gosh. Okay. So this is a very long time ago. I think so I would say like I played a couple of LARPs, but the one that really drew me in was Jason Morningstar's Juggernaut.
Mhm.
And so Juggernaut, if for those if you who are not familiar with it, it's basically a deck of cards, and the deck of cards represents like this machine that could tell the future. And I believe it's set in like the 1920s or 1940s, I think, or 1950s, somewhere around there. Oh, actually, now that I'm thinking back, I think it's like around the time of the Cold War. So it was about like that setting. So it's
Yeah.
definitely not the 1920s. Now that I'm like
Little
remembering
after.
more and more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just a little bit after
Yeah.
that. And so this machine that can tell the future, and all of you are either scientists or politicians or like, generals, and you're all stuck in the same room together. And you have to figure out what to do with this machine. Is it telling the truth? Is it actually telling the future? Or is it just like, spewing out whatever it's spewing out, right? And so you're stuck in this room for a long period of time until you can figure out a resolution. And it's high tension, it's just like very strange. I want to say that like the genre is very much like it's surreal, like Severance, right? Like the TV
Mhm.
show Severance, or like it's got that sort of feeling of like, is it real? Is it not? It sort of like lingers in between, and so that's the type of stories I'm really excited for.
Interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see how having experienced that, you'd be like, oh, I can, because so much of TTRPGs is just often very much fantasy or sci-fi of some kind, and I'm a big fan of that. But it can completely then alienate anyone who might be interested in genres outside of that. So I can see where they're coming from. Okay, but now say you've gotten into this field, you're enjoying the games, and you start creating games. For me, one of the big hurdles that I face when I don't face this when I'm writing like the narrative, but I do when I'm trying to create a game, which is that for me, it feels like there's too many tools in the sense that there are too many mechanics and I don't know where to start by picking one. It's kind of like someone's put me in a big shed and then gone, go play. And I'm like, I need instructions. Where would you start with figuring out the right tools for the kind of game you want to create?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it sort of comes down to two things, right? So when I start, I usually try to find a game that is similar to the themes that I'm trying to, or the story that I'm trying to tell, and the themes that I'm interested in. So I would start from there, like figure out what are the themes, what is the story, and from there see if there are any other games that are similar to that, and play those games, see what they're like, and see if we could use it as a base. And so like if that is like a base, say it has like base mechanics that are that are sort of doing the same thing that I want to do, then I can iterate from there. And so as an example, like PBTA, like Powered by the Apocalypse
Yeah.
games, that engine is very good for storytelling, not so much for combat or, or anything that's like wargaming, right? Like
Mhm.
that style of like role playing. So for PBTA, like the focus is the story, the focus is like the tension between players, and so knowing that I could pair it together with like a theme that is, it could be like high tension drama, it could be like, um, political intrigue or something like that, and so knowing those two things, that's sort of how I would start, and then start iterating from there and adding stuff to it.
You say iterating, and I'm always curious about what a person's iteration process is. Where does it go after draft one is ready for you, at least?
Oh gosh. Okay. So, usually we go straight into playtesting. So the first items that I usually would like to have ready are the character sheets, any sort of core mechanics that might alter like the setting. And so it could be like, say for example, if it's on a spaceship, then is there a sheet that you need for the spaceship? Are there specific mechanics needed for the spaceship? Do you have dice? Add those dice in. Do you need cards? Drop some cards. Um, Anything that's like additional that is required for telling the story along with the character sheets. We just sort of like write all that stuff out, create all that stuff out, and start playing it out before we even start writing out a draft. If you need to like brainstorm some stuff, or like uh, just quickly write down like a structure, then that's totally fine. You could like create a quick start or something. Um, but usually like the first draft, for me it should be like pretty bare bones. It shouldn't be too like intense, because we still want to test out like the structure. We want to make sure that like it's sound, and make sure that like makes sense first and foremost, before going into like writing pages and pages of like mechanics to clarify things, because that's like a lot of time spent into like creating a thing, and we don't want to necessarily like do that first before like we know, if this thing even works, right? So once we figure out the thing works, then we start writing things out. Then we have like I want to say like a 1.5 draft, like a draft 1.5,
Mhm, mhm.
before we start iterating and doing more and more work on that.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm getting an idea of your process. And it's very interesting, and I think one of the things you talked about, or you might have tweeted this. I'm not stalking you. This was just research. Is about how the New York art scene, or just art exhibits in a way, can be very useful in inspiring game design. and I'm wondering if Forgery was a result of those experiences. And what are some other ideas that you might have picked up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to art school in New York. It is very much similar to like my background. So yes, I went to art school in New York. I think I graduated about, oh, it's over 10 years now. It's probably like 15. I don't know how long it's been. It's been a while. So
And you signed a deal with the painting anyway, so you're fine.
yeah, exactly. Um, and so, yeah, when I graduated art school, it was definitely hard to find a job. So it definitely has some parallels. I didn't go into the arts because it's very expensive, believe it or not. Trying to become an artist is
Okay.
like very difficult. And so, yeah, there are definitely parallels there. I think the art scene in New York is it's interesting. Like the communities that are built around that scene aren't always necessarily centered around the art itself. It's not around like many different communities, like even this creative field, right? TTRPGs, it's like a creative field. Like there are a lot of, and I think for the arts, like the, visual arts a little bit more, where it's like the communities that are built around this thing aren't necessarily about the art at all times. It's more about the tensions between the people within the community. There's also a lot of drama. There's like a lot of stuff that happens between people, um, and I feel like it's more of that versus like what we see in TTRPGs, where it's like TTRPGs we still play. We're still
Mhm.
immersed in like the art that we create, but in that scene, it's very much about like the drama and like the people talking about each other behind their backs and that kind of thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
I see. I'm curious though. So with Forgery, where you play as someone who has essentially taken on the job of forging a cursed painting, um, I'm curious. Oh, my brain just drew a blank there. You know how the question escapes you mid-sentence, but okay.
Oh god, yeah,
Uh,
all the time.
okay. So about the tensions, and I'm going to move on to the next one. So, okay, art and
Yeah, take your
technology.
time.
Art and technology often have this reactive, symbiotic relationship that I've noticed, right? And their movements come out of one breakthrough happening in one field, inspiring the other. And I know this topic has been brought up in many, many spheres, but AI seems like one of those things where it's a breakthrough in technology and a dangerous one at that. And we don't know where it's going or how it's going to get reined in, if at all. Do you think art is going to start reacting or has already started reacting? And is it affecting the kind of art that we make now?
I will definitely say that the paintings that I'm making for this game are actually based off of AI paintings. And so yeah, I definitely think that like artists right now, um, they're taking note of like what's going on with AI art, right? Because it is their bread and butter. This is their livelihoods that we're talking about. And so the only like I think there are a couple of ways that you can react to it. It's either, you could try to make something that is not replicable or try to do something against the grain and like make commentary on the thing that's happening.
Mhm,
And so I like to think that like the paintings that I'm making are sort of like commentary on what's going on and like trying to like create something that is weird enough that is sort of like AI art, but not really like because it's all hand painted. Everything that is like being done. I mean, you probably can see some in the background, but like it's all hand painted. And it's sort of like a reaction to AI art and because the content of the game is like about an art forger, it brings up this like interesting parallel between like what is, you know, who owns the art, what is, does the artist still have like ownership over this art? Um, even after it's been sold, like does it belong to the person who bought it, or is it like, do you still have the piece of the artist with you? And if
mhm,
it's an art forgery or if it's like AI art, then who's who's the main creator behind it, right? Like
mhm,
is it um is it still like the original artist, like the original painter, or is it based off because it's based off of like another painting, like is it is it theirs? Like,
mhm,
you know.
mhm.
So ownership is like definitely something that I think is like a theme that pops up in this game as well.
Another thing that you were talking about is obviously how the art space is prone to, and I think many creative spaces are prone to this, the sense of crab mentality and a kind of very professional envy, right? But I'm curious, I feel like I don't hear about accountants chasing success, and I don't hear about, backstabbing engineers, not at least maybe Tesla and Edison. It was a time when this was a thing, but not anymore. Why? What do you think it's about art that kind of brings out the sense of desperation to stand out and have a legacy? And yeah, why is that? Why are we like this?
Yeah, so I can sort of talk about this a little bit where in a different kind of lens. So after art school, I tried to find a job for a very
Mhm.
long time. I mean, it was only a few months, but like it felt like a very long time at the time.
I bet.
But I eventually landed a job at a bank. And I had no banking experience prior to that. I had no idea what I was doing. But as like a struggling 21-year-old, yeah, 21-year-old, trying to find, any sort of income, like I somehow got a job at a bank. When I was working there, we were not paid very well. It was peanuts
Mhm.
compared to, the executives or like the people that are working in corporate because it was in a retail store,
Mhm.
retail bank.
Mhm.
And so when I was there, you could definitely see the tensions between people there as well. Like
Mhm.
people were also had that crab mentality where this one time someone had tried to frame me for having drugs so that I could get fired and so that they can take my commission. It's like yeah, it's just like wild stuff happens, I think, when you're given this idea of like, this is scarce, right?
Mhm.
Like you don't have a lot, and especially if you're not getting paid a lot, if it's like, if you're getting exploited in some sort of way by a larger company, I think that like, that's sort of when that crab mentality happens, where it's just like there's only so much to go around, so I have to have like all of it. In the art space, I think the parallel is that like there isn't this mega corp, right? There isn't like this big corporation that's just like, giving pennies out to whoever it is. But I think that because the art world is actually, it actually doesn't make that much money. Like the income that gets generated out of it is actually not that much. Even through like um, I believe there was like a documentary on like Sotheby's or something a while ago where they said that like the money that is made from art is like minuscule, but like the people who pay for this stuff, they're like really extremely, extremely wealthy. Um, and so like for artists who are creating this type of stuff, it's just like, you know, there isn't that sense of control, and like when you can what you can control is like the art that you make, but then once it's out there it's just sort of like you're fighting for whatever scraps you have, right? And so that's just my take on it. I
Mhm.
may be completely off base, but that's just sort of my thought on it.
No, I think it definitely feels true because there is this sense of I if you have someone else has everyone's attention, then I'm not getting that same attention, and it's very easy to fall into this trap of it's a zero sum game and I have to win to survive. And I think that's possibly also where the desperation seems to come from, is that it comes down to survival. It's not like everyone's trying to win just the lottery for like, you know excess, but it's basics that are threatened. So it's like, okay, gotta fight, right? And that's why, again, horror seems like a very good genre to play into because of this. uh Coming to horror, Van Richten, Jiangshi, Betrayal, and now Forgery, horror seems to be a genre you're drawn to. However, I find that it's challenging to play into this genre, especially in a TTRPG, because the audience is so willing to just not believe, not invest, because it threatens something very fundamental to being human, right? How do you create a space that allows them to kind of engage with and let themselves feel threatened and scared? What's the approach to that?
Yeah, I think that horror, it especially when it's like immersive like this, an immersive genre like this, I think that like a lot of the time we have to when we're playing with other people, it's sort of like you have to be vulnerable to others. But at the same time, you don't want to be vulnerable to a point where you're just like giving everything away, right? Like you still have to have your boundaries. You have to have like the safety tools and the calibration tools available to you, so that that way you're not like moving at a pace that's just that's just completely out of bounds, right? And so I think that a lot of it comes down to giving the players agency, and so feeling like they have the agency uh, to do something or change something within the story. That sort of uh, gives them a sense of like, okay, like I can move forward and like play this game. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that creating an environment where we want to be vulnerable. So dimming the lights, right? Like this could be atmospheric, where it's just like dimming the lights, putting on spooky music, changing the atmospheric so that that way there's like this tension. Um, that could be another. And then finally through mechanics, like going back to the agency bit, um, there could be you sort of have to have that or want to have that buy-in of like at any point in time I could lose little bit of that agency, right? So and I'm okay with that. But if it's too much, then I'll just tap out. But in the meantime, like if for example, dread, right? The mechanics for dread is a Jenga tower, and at the core of it, each tile that you pull out, that's just like how much closer and closer you are to your character dying or something big happening or like something terrible happening. And so when you're playing with that, you don't know when the tower is going to fall. You don't have agency or that much agency over like when the tower is going to fall, but you still have a little bit of it in the sense that like you are actively pulling the tiles, you are actively like telling the story based off of that. But the part that is that drives the anxiety or the horror, like that comes from like the anxiety of the tower potentially falling over, right? And so giving players agency, but not too much, like having that sort of aspect of like, is this going to, uh, impact the game in a way that will like, that'll make me scared. Like that's something that I think is helpful for a horror game. Another example I'd like to give is for Deimos Academy. When we were designing that, this was Austin Taylor, Amanda Collin and I. When we were designing that game, we wanted to make sure that like players could tell the story together so that that way, you know, even players who are not fans of horror, they could just like go ahead, run into it, and just like tell some creepy stories, right? And so we provided them with some tools, basically like listing off like here are some creepy things. You can say yes or no to them, and the ones that you want to say yes to, you can go ahead and tell them in this collaborative setting. And you would also have some memory cards. And at any point in time, you can tear up a memory card, and that will be like the point where your heart drops, right? Like just having that moment of like, I could tear this up, and it might not even be my own memory. It could be someone else's memory. So having that buy-in of like, it's okay to do these weird and emotional things because you are in a safe space where you're playing out this game. So that was a long take, a very
But
long
very,
take.
very insightful. Yeah. Um. Okay. I want to poke a bit more at horror. We talked about the mechanics, and now I'm curious. It has horror as a genre has just seems to have seen a resurgence in media across the board. Do you have thoughts on why there's this rise in popularity? Is it purely cyclical, or we're just coming back to it, or more response to this increased state of fear that the world finds itself in?
I think a little bit of both. So I think that the I think over the course of the pandemic, I think that things were definitely at a point where it's just like, you know, and I'm speaking anecdotally. This isn't like I have hard data on this at all, but I
Mhm,
think that a lot of audiences were seeking things that were like a little less scary,
mhm,
things that are just like, things are terrible enough. Like we all know what's going to happen next. I want to look for something that's like a little cozier, a
mhm,
little like less scary. I just want to have like a good time.
mhm,
But I think that um, as a result of like a lot of these weird social political things that have happened, after or not after the pandemic, but like during the time that the pandemic's happened,
Mhm.
um, like a lot of artists, a lot of creatives want to respond to it. And because of this, they are creating artwork that is based around horror. So, as an example, we have the Triangle of Sadness, we have the Menu. Uh, we happen to have like all of these movies around the same time that are about uh, about wealth disparity, right?
Mhm.
And so it seems interesting that it's all happening around the same time, um, around the same time of like, the pandemic, and also just like everything else that's happening in the world,
Mhm.
right? So I think it might be like a critique or like even like a reaction to what's happening, but also I think audiences are sort of hungry for it as well now. Like they're starting to get that,
Mhm.
like, hey, I actually do want to watch more horror based around this kind of stuff. Like I'm ready for it now.
I can totally see that, and I'm curious because something that happens, at least when you're writing in film, right, is that you become a horror writer, a comedy writer, and kind of becomes the place where you're supposed to be a. My cat decided to wake up finally.
Oh,
Um, yeah, it becomes a space that you're supposed to kind of be. This is your genre. Do you think TTRPGs are suspect to the same kind of like, hey, this is your genre, now stay there, or and is that a fair assessment, or do you think that if we figure out because so much of game design is about the mechanics, not just about the world building, right? Um, do you think that if you figure out generally rule design, you could be making for any genre, and there's no need to be restricted to a
oh yeah.
particular? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think at its core, it depends on what the creator wants, right? So if the creator wants to have something that is a horror setting or like a horror game in general, and like they want to create mechanics around a horror game, that's totally fair. Like I think it's definitely possible to do. Um, that being said, generally like right now, in terms of uh just pop culture in general, like we treat TTRPGs as like a genre and medium at the
Hmm.
same time.
Hmm.
We think of it as high fantasy, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
high fantasy, and it's not like it's just a genre. It's not even like a vehicle for storytelling. It's just
Hmm.
one thing.
Hmm.
And I think that's just because D&D obviously very popular, and that's why we sort of associate TTRPGs with fantasy.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, occasionally you have like a little bit of horror, like Van Richten's. There's like all of that stuff, but I think at its core, like most people think of TTRPGs as like a fantasy thing, and so because of that, a lot of game design, it just happens to also be set in fantasy settings. That doesn't mean that like maybe the game designer doesn't know how to design like other things, but it's just that like if this is what is popular right now and this is what most people know, then and this is what most people are going to be making money off of, then it's most likely that there's going to be a lot of fantasy stuff in TTRPGs. um, However, that being said, I think that there are a lot of games out there that are breaking the mold. So I mentioned Dread earlier, Ten Candles, Alice is Missing. Like all these games are becoming increasingly popular, and they're definitely showing you know the wider audience that there is this sort of interest in these types of games. And so like Alice is Missing it just got picked up for a TV show, right? Like Tales from the Loop, that was a TV show. Like there are all these games that have different types of genres that they're playing in. And I think that as long as the audience starts seeing more and more of this stuff, they'll start feeling less like Dungeons and Dragons is the only TTRPG. It's like it's like at this point like band-aids, right? Like where a band-aid, you think of like a band-aid is actually like a plaster or whatever.
Hmm.
But like, they'll no longer think of D&D that way. They'll start thinking like, oh, there's like other types of books out there.
Hmm.
So I can like look at other types of games and see what would mesh well with me, right?
Hmm.
So that's sort of why I'm thinking.
I want to talk about Forgery a bit more specifically. One of the opening lines in Forgery talks about the character you play has too much talent and a great eye, but no contacts or rich parents. Can you talk to me about why you chose to describe them as someone talented as opposed to someone unsure about their skill? Because imposter syndrome also feels very common among artists, but I don't think that's what this is kind of trying to tackle.
No, this is definitely about professional jealousy. And so I wanted to frame it that way because we want the character to know that she is good, or think that she is good, right? And so I think that like when we have characters, I like to play with like dark, tragic characters, especially characters who are just like who have a little bit of an ego to them. So that way, when they start feeling that imposter or not sorry not imposter syndrome, the other one, professional jealousy, it's just like very intense, right? It's like a very intense professional jealousy because you're just like, I am so good, my peers who are not as good as me, like why are they succeeding, why are they getting um, big deals or signed with like art galleries, whereas like I'm good or as good or even better than them, but like I'm not getting anywhere. And so I just want to play with that idea. This is supposed to be like a pretty intense game. It's not definitely not for kids. And yeah, I just wanted to play with that darker theme.
Um, it also feels like when you're creating something like a solo RPG, there's a challenge of making the prompt something that is going to push the player forward, keep them interested, but also at the same time not just guide them in a specific direction. So what would you say is a design tip for writing good prompts, especially in a solo RPG?
Yeah, so for this, it's a combination of a few things. So the game itself, it has journaling involved. So there are a few questions that you can answer. Um, but it also has a choose your own path type of system where it'll give you some prompts. So, as an example, I'm gonna the Kickstart or the sorry, I'm doing it too now. I'm treating all crowdfunding campaigns or crowdfunding platforms as like just Kickstarter. I'm using
Yeah.
Indiegogo. It's completely different. It's
Yes.
actually kind of the same. um, but as an example, in the game itself, you have like your painting that you're like doing the paint by numbers, but you have to choose what type of colors that you want to use. And so you are presented with the choices of as you're painting, you're reminded of blistering your egg yolk during lunch, reminding you of an episode of Dr. Pimple Popper. Um, the texture of the toast you grated between your teeth at brunch, it was burnt and overpriced. Or your sister lecturing you about getting a real job again. At least she paid for brunch. And so you're presenting with these three different prompts, and dependent on those, which one you pick, you can sort of choose which colors to use for your paint by numbers, and then based off of that, you go to a specific chapter, and that leads you down like another chapter, and outcomes and all sorts of things. And so, as an example, like if you're going for the first option, which is like blistering your egg yolk, you'll color in the spaces labeled one with warm color, so reds, oranges, yellows, um, and yeah, you would just like go down the chapters based off of that. Um, I think that's like the idea of like trying to create prompts that way uh, that are sort of like choose your own adventure type,
Mhm,
like that is that's sort of like a branching sort of narrative, right? Like
mhm,
making sure that like the players know where to go. But when it's like a journaling prompt, like that kind of prompt, there are two things I have to keep in mind. And the first thing is like making sure that it follows with the story, so that way, it would make sense no matter what the player writes down. And also making sure that uh, it's open ended, but not too open ended to the point where you know the player will be able to inject a part of themselves into the
mhm,
character while still following that structure of story. And so even the story's already laid out for you, like, things are going to happen a specific way.
mhm,
You still have the agency to write down, um, your thoughts and feelings
mhm,
in the mind of this character, and you still have the agency of like reacting back
mhm.
to the characters around you.
You said that you can essentially treat this to an extent like choose your own adventure, and how the prompts are going to guide you in certain directions. Is there an outcome in Forgery where it all works out and you have a kind of you feel content with where you are?
Y- Kind of. Yes and no. So, um, with actually, I'll just say spoiler warning right here. There is an outcome where you end up being with your friends and family, and you end up sort of just rejecting the demon that
Hmm.
that you've sided with for this
Hmm.
entire time. And instead, you decide to do something else. So
Hmm.
there is that option that you can, like, go down. But a majority of the other decisions are very much like you are. How do I say this without too many spoilers? You side with the demon, and things don't necessarily go the way they that they should. And
Hmm.
if they do go the way that your character wants it to go, then it's like horrific. It's like
Hmm.
creepy and weird.
I can imagine the creepy and weird because you've listed a lot of interesting references that inspired or have served as inspiration for this. Um, so one of the ones that came to mind was also, I think, Black Swan, because I just felt like, again, the sense of obsessiveness to the point where the lines between um, fact and fiction start blurring, right? Um, did you have any moments after having played the playtested the game many times, I'm sure, where you were like, "I need to step away from this. This is getting a bit weird."
uh, kind of. Though I don't know. Like, I think I was just like I was so invested in the game and the story. I've just been
Mhm,
like, just like so focused on it.
mhm.
Um,
That doesn't
I
sound
think
like the character at all.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, like, yes, there were times where I had to like step away and just like take a breather, but
Mm,
like I was just like very much invested
mm,
in this project, and like to the point where I'm just like, oh my God, like, I just have to make more stuff about it.
mhm,
Like the grand plan is to have a trilogy
mm. Oh,
um where the demon just like pops up everywhere. And so like after this it would be uh after painting, the second
mhm,
one would be based around like fashion and New
mhm.
York Fashion Week, and then the third one would be based around like music, and like
Right.
creating your own soundtrack and music that way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak much about the fashion week, but I can totally imagine how just even the modern age of Spotify would kind of push you to this sense of I need to get the like replay counts up, and I need to get music that's going to
Yeah,
just make sure that people quickly listen to it. It needs to be a hit, and like no, we're not even creating albums anymore. It's just I need one hit single, right? Um,
right.
Right. Go ahead, do that. Just take care of yourself. I believe you're doing 26 paintings for this project for Forgery, so that's
Yeah,
yeah. Take a break. Take a break. Definitely.
yeah.
Uh,
I get a little intense when I when I dive deep into something.
that's good. That's good. Okay, I have some general questions. So this one you know about. It's your company is called Games and a Curry. I'm curious, what's
Yeah.
the game it's referring to? Is there a game it's referring to, and is there a curry that you always kind of find yourself drawn to?
Yeah. So, when me and my partner first started this, we actually were a games review site. And so we started as a game review blog. We were like reviewing board games and pairing restaurants with like we would go to restaurants, play the games there, and be like, oh, this is like a fun thing. Like we should write about it. We ended up writing more about like the games that we played than the actual restaurants. But like we
Mhm,
used to go to this place called Curry like all the
mhm,
time. Korea, I don't know if it's still around, but it was in like it's like downtown-ish Manhattan. I think it was like 20th Street or something like that. Um, or 14th Street, around that area. But like it was in
mhm,
Manhattan. And we would get curry there and we would play like a small board game there. I
mhm,
think we play a lot of uh Green Couch Games is games. And so they're like tiny little board games. They were like about like this big. They were like a
Mhm.
small box.
Yeah.
And so like it's easy to just like break out and start playing. And then eventually we just like ended up doing something completely different. So we are renaming our brand eventually. We're probably going to change it to, so the grand scheme is that we're going to be changing it to read only memory. Um so it's a play on ROM,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of
Uh-huh.
fun.
I got it.
Be
Yeah.
yeah, you got it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah. So, yeah, we're switching over to read only memory
yeah.
because, we are doing more and more RPG stuff,
Mhm.
instead of board game stuff. So, I think that's the direction that we're going to be taking from here on out.
Mhm. Interesting.
And sorry,
Uh,
the second part of the question was what type of curry that I like, right? Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we used to play Splendor a lot. That was like the game that like we really enjoyed. And then for curry, I personally, so I'm from Hong Kong. So like
Mhm,
Malaysian curry, like Hong Kong curry, that's like what I used to have all the time.
mhm,
But also we in New York, we used to go to two places. So we went to this place called Royale that had really good Indian curry, and we also went to Korea, which was Japanese curry. So like that was sort of like where we hung out a lot.
I am now gonna feel hungry, and I'm sure the viewers are as well, so that's a go eat curry, people. I'm sure you can all find some. Um, one of the in one of your videos, you talk about how upcoming kind of designers and writers can use Twitter to network and try to find work. And I'm curious because this was made a few years, or at least a while back. Would you think that with everything that's happening with Twitter right now, or will be happening in a day or two, that's still advice that you would want to stick by? And also, do you have any tips on being able to survive that hellscape a bit better?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because like social media has been so helpful for people who can't make it to in-person conventions.
Mhm,
Um, and now that, things aren't doing so well on social
yeah.
media, it's sort of like hard to try to find those communities or those
Mhm,
pockets of communities. And I think that like honestly, it is up to us to try to make sure that we continue having these conversations and try to like um connect people with other people, right? Like the
mhm,
hardest thing to do is actually to make uh, connections.
mm,
But once you have those networking connections, then you can start like, thinking about uh um how is my career going to go from here?
mm,
I would definitely say that like part of finding contract jobs or even full-time jobs in the gaming industry is through one, having a portfolio, and two, having like a just like a lot of connections. uh, and so with Twitter being the way that is right now, I think right now that the best time, like we're going to have to start depending more on Discord. We're going to have to start depending more on like on Instagram. I don't want to say Facebook. I really don't.
I know.
I Yeah, I hate
Yeah,
Facebook, so I'm gonna say no to Facebook. Uh,
I'll
because
co-sign
we
that.
know, yeah. But any sort of like social media, like that's where
Mm,
a lot of the creators like spend their time on. And so like I think for the folks who are going to conventions, if they can, if they've gotten to a point where they've networked enough, if they can try to find avenues for their friends to like meet new people, like, whether that's exchanging emails or, exchanging information or doing Zoom calls like this, like that would be amazing. So that that way we sort of give back to the community. Not really a community, you know what I mean?
mhm,
Give back to other creators, like that's
mhm,
sort of what I would like to see.
mhm,
And then I would say that the other thing that we could do is look at the way that conventions are built, and if conventions could have like an online presence and try to, do communications through that way, then
mhm.
that would be amazing. So that that way we can, uh, get more creatives who are starting out to a place where they can get more jobs. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's in India, like if it wasn't for something like Big Bad Con, I probably wouldn't be having any access to kind of the
Right.
North American TTRPG space, right? I mean, we would mostly be just doing our thing on our own because it's one thing to get noticed as, oh, you guys exist, and another to be actually engaged with. And so
Right.
much of that engagement comes down to I recognize you after a few times. Like I've come across you, yeah. Now I'm ready to feel comfortable talking to you. And it's that
Yeah.
yeah, social media was working for that, though I agree I'm not a fan of most of the spaces there.
Yeah.
Like measure your time out there, people. Don't spend more time creating. Trust me, on the long run, I don't think social media is, yeah, the amount of time doesn't pay off the equivalent
Yeah.
return on it. Um, that's largely all the questions I had. I've already taken up a lot of your time. Do you have anything that you want to talk about that we didn't really get to? Tell me more about Forgery or
Ooh.
anything else, and
Yeah.
what you have going.
I would love to talk more about Forgery if that's okay.
Yeah, please tell me
Um,
more about it.
I would like to talk about all the people that are working on it because even though this is like my first game, I mean, it's not really the first game that I have on the cover and everything. I mean, the first game that I've done in a while where I'm the only designer and developer on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are other people that I'm working with, so I want to make sure that like I call them out.
Mm-hmm.
So the first person is like the cover artist. So like Alex Ekman Lawn, like he's done an incredible job with like the cover. He has a secret cover. I mean, it's not really secret anymore, but he like made like a sketch that I really wanted as like the front cover, but when I was like talking to my friends, I was like, which cover do you prefer? They were all just like, the second one that he made is kind of terrifying and it would probably scare away a lot of people. So choose this other one instead. And so I was like, okay, fine. But if we hit our stretch goal of I think it's like $20,000, then
Mm-hmm.
I'll just be releasing that like in the book somewhere as well. And the one that I've released right now is just a sketch. Like once we hit that stretch goal, I'll be able to pay him for a final version to put into the book. Alongside him, Ravi Lavin was a graphic designer who did a fantastic job laying out the game itself. Matthias Benici also did the covers, graphic design. Karen Twelves did like all the editing with my text and just making sure that I sound like a decent writer.
That is
uh,
amazing.
exactly. And then Indrani is actually going to be making the dice for the game, and so she's created these amazing dice. I can probably like show the
Mm-hmm.
camera, but like she made these like I don't know. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, yes, you can. Okay, so like she made these like amazing dice that are just like based off of the game itself. And she's incredible. Like all of the work that she's done is just amazing. So I'm just very privileged to be working with her. And then if we hit our stretch goals, then Austin Taylor will be designing a game with me. David Jones Krause will be creating a soundtrack for the game. Aaron Catano Saez will be doing an audiobook so you can just like listen to stuff and react as you go. And Robert Richburg, one of my friends from art school, will be doing some spot illustrations. So a lot of stuff is happening. A lot of people are involved. Very cool people. Love working with all of them. And also, Carlos Cisco and I have written a screenplay based off of the game. And so, fingers crossed it goes somewhere. But I love the screenplay. It's very weird and gross. And so I'm very happy about it.
Everybody, Forgery is currently on Indiegogo. It's a pretty awesome game. It's about a artist who takes on a cursed contract to forge a cursed painting, and paint by numbers is a correct way of describing that.
Yes,
Yeah,
paint by numbers.
you get a bunch of prompts, and then based on the prompts, you paint the art pieces in, and hopefully land up with your own personal horrific painting, and not a happy ending because I think horrors are more interesting when it's like tragic. And sometimes tragedy is good, makes you appreciate the good things in life. Um,
Cathartic. That's
it's
what it
cathartic. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for.
is.
Amazing. Banana Chance, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully, we'll get to talk to you when part 2 of this project comes out, and then part 3 as well, because we want to see all of it get made. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight. Thank you.
Awesome. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye.